Good evening and welcome to this next edition of Industry Insights. I'm Andrew Johnson, CEO of ACS, and tonight we're going to be discussing tech startups and the important role that they will play in our economic recovery. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight and pay my respects to elders past and present. I am genuinely really excited. We've got two ex-ACS presidents here tonight, and Edward Mandla was president of ACS back in 2004-05, and Philip Argy, president in 2006-07. Edward runs a very successful executive search function for tech companies, and Philip's a practicing lawyer, but has also been involved with City Angels for the last 10 years and is a current board member. So really looking forward to getting into those questions. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, Andrew.
Good evening.
Don't forget, for our ACS members dialing in, we've got the chat function. Put your questions through at any time and we'll pick those up on our online chats and share those with Philip and with Edward. So before we begin, why don't we just start with some scene setting, and Philip, we might start with you, just a bit of your history in dealing with tech startups.
So I've been dealing with tech startups probably for 40 years because I ran a intellectual property practice, and one of the earliest things that startups do is start investigating patentability and things like that, copyright, all the IP interests they can have. So I was getting a lot of startups coming through my office, but at that stage quite narrowly focused on the legal aspects. But it certainly got me interested in seeing and developing a great interest in Aussie innovation, and then seeing the frustration when they couldn't commercialise, things like that. So when I retired, about 13 years ago now, I really took a much greater interest and joined up Sydney Angels, and have a great time now really getting involved in fabulous Aussie innovation, my passion.
Fantastic, thank you. And Edward, how about you?
Well, I sit on 10 tech startup boards, and at any point, I guess I'm evaluating probably another half a dozen, or they're evaluating me or something like that. But I guess I got involved. I had some banker friends and they wanted to run tech companies by me before they invested in them. Now, bankers and high wealth people are very good at property. They understand agriculture and they're great at mining. So think of mining. You got a plot of land, you dig it up, you find something, you test it, you work out how much it is, and it becomes mathematical models of processing and distribution. And you hit technology and software, and it's completely intangible. So consistently, the tech opportunities they brought to me, I said no to. And they put their money in and they did their dough every time. So I build a reputation for, if Edward says yes, it doesn't mean it's going to be successful, but if he says no, you need to take that probably a little bit seriously.
Fantastic. I'm sometimes told that this is like asking about your favourite child, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. When you look back at your investing career, which investments, either physically with the cash or mentoring, has stood out to you and give you the most fondness looking back over that time?
It's really the ones who, you know, angel investing is called smart money for a reason. It's not like an investment. You put cash in and then go away and leave it. You put cash in, but you work with the entrepreneurs, with the founders, you sit around the table, you brainstorm problem solving. So the ones that have given me the most satisfaction are the ones where I've had the most engagement, and sitting around the table, and it almost doesn't matter what it is. Some of them have been pharmaceuticals, but most of them tend to be in the tech space, because that's an area I like, and that's been fabulous. And you know, you really, there's a really important stage after you've invested where you now test if the proposition they put to you was real. And sometimes it is, sometimes you do some significant pivots, but if you're all around the table sharing it and agreeing on where you're going, riding that investment is really the most satisfying, and watch it go from taxiway to runway to takeoff. That's fabulous. It is like a child, watching them grow up, it really is.
And are you happy to name drop one or two that give you great pride?
The ones that have gone on to bigger and better things and have listed and done well are obviously worth mentioning. Atomo Diagnostics, now on the ASX, AT1, if you want to go and look at it, bump the price up a bit for me. But that, you know, that 10 years ago, no one was doing diagnostics on a stick. I mean, people are familiar with sort of the pregnancy test kit type of thing, a little plastic gadget, and you use that. They've got really sophisticated now diagnostic laboratories on a stick, and for those parts of the world that don't have good pathology labs, it's a fabulous idea. And in fact, Bill and Melinda Gates are big investors in Atomo for the African world, for HIV testing. Of course, they're now just developing a version for COVID testing, very timely, and going on to bigger and better things. So that's been a really successful one. Other ones have sometimes been ahead of their time. A really good one called Stage Bits, which was effectively a database of all the bits and pieces that people use for stage productions, from schools to opera companies. And then you could loan them out. So, you know, you might have had a paper mache pig in your production this week, and a school in Western Australia is doing the same play for their school curriculum in a few weeks' time. They're going to go out and make a paper mache pig. Whereas if they log in and say, has anyone got a paper mache pig we can borrow, you can share it around. So really great idea. It lasted for 2 years and crashed. People couldn't be bothered populating their database with what they had, and you know, just didn't reach critical mass. So you can't pick them, but doesn't mean they weren't still great ideas. So yeah, that's part. They are high risk, but high satisfaction as well.
What about you, Edward? Which couples
There's a lot of
stand out?
great moments, but White Runway has a very special part in my heart. Rebecca, the founder, I remember when she was moonlighting, and then she made that big decision to tell her employer that she was going to go part-time. And I'll never forget the coffee we had when she said, I'm going to resign and I'm going to go full-time, but I'm so scared I'm not going to have a monthly salary. I don't know how it's going to work. And she was an amazing human being. She worked 18 hours a day. She slept in her little tiny office, but her commitment was incredible. And Philip said the word pivot. So the initial business was, gosh, celebrity fashions. And Rebecca had the ability to take a $10,000 Emmy dress or an Oscar dress and have a knockoff within 3 days for $500 and to sell it on the internet. And it was pretty tough going in that early days on the internet, not a lot of trust. But the business was going really well. I sent her to radio and television school, and she then started getting regular parts on the Today Show, Current Affair. Her website kept crashing all the time when the general public started going there. But what she noticed was that people were buying these dresses in lots, on average, in lots of fours. And you know, she sat down at a board meeting. She said, I don't know why they're buying them in fours and threes and fives. And I said, well, ring them. And what she found was that the majority of her market was bridesmaids. And you know, Philip, life's changed since we got married, whereas the groom, he had to pay everything. What we found is that bridesmaids have to pay for their own dresses. But when you pay for your own dress, you want to wear it again. So the big pivot came to White Runway, dresses for all occasions, and an extraordinary story of the many twists and turns. But that word, as Philip used, pivot, that pivot was critical. Rebecca will tell you that her success came from having the discipline of a regular monthly board meeting. So I went out to find an old retailer. I found a guy, Rod Walker, who had run Rebel and sold it, who had run Freedom Furniture and sold it. He was chairman of Bras and Things. He was chairman of of Fantastic Furniture. He was chairman of Godfrey's, and it was an old retailer. And the three of us we just had that monthly meeting. And I'll never forget the early meetings. Rebecca would have 60 imperatives that she had to do. And I remember saying, well, what's the one or two? And by really drilling it down. But it was a great journey. We went to the exit. We had the earn out. The three of us have now invested in a new, let's call a retail 2.0 company called Kit.fit, and I encourage everyone to have a look at what Kit.fit's doing. We just raised $1 million. 600 came from crowdfunding. We've already got 200,000 followers on this retail business. It's about to launch, but a lot of our learnings now sort of being shared with a new bunch of people. A great journey.
What about the concept of IT professionalism for a tech startup and tech talent? We talk about pivoting and failing fast and really focused on innovation and finding that gap in the marketplace. What does IT professionalism look like in a small tech startup environment?
So the first point is to pick up on the word innovation. I mean, back when I was president, I would give a lot of talks about the role of professionalism in innovation. The first thing is there's two distinct points on the innovation curve, if you like, and they're both really valid. One is where you invent something completely new that the world's not seen before, and that's fabulous. But the other one, equally valid, is doing old things a better way. And what you have if you get IT professionals is they've got their technical expertise that they can bring to bear on practical day-to-day problems. And IT professionals are really good at working out innovative ways of doing existing things that might only be incremental improvement, but they're really fabulous. And that's why I used to say, you know, from backroom to boardroom, you put an IT professional on your board and you imbue them with the corporate strategy and the competitive environment, they can bring to bear their IT expertise and fashion significant innovation in the way the corporation operates and bring it significant productivity improvements and competitive edge. Now you translate that into a startup, of course, and apart from the capital requirement, that then becomes very effective because all the world now needs you to get that competitive edge. So they're really very well placed to have those insights into the competitive environment or whatever the problem is being solved, and IT training in terms of analytical approach and programming a solution is something ingrained into all IT professionals. So they're really extremely well adapted to being involved in startups and making a fabulous contribution.
Edward, your thoughts?
I think I've noticed a major shift. I think if you go back 10 or 15 years, a lot of IT professionals may have had no qualifications and they just grew up through the profession. What I've noticed with the startups is just extraordinary technical people who just have a wonderful academic base, and some of them with a corporate base, and a lot of them in the startups have somewhere worked with the other technical people together. So I've seen a real increase in professionalism. I'd have to make a comment on their values. I think they work extremely hard. There seems to be a strong ethical framework they adhere to, particularly around security and data protection. So I think that's really, really good. I always throw in the ACS just to see what the perception is, and I'm just delighted. I get consistently the ACS is cool, and I just have to congratulate, you know, the past presidents and what you've done, Andrew, with the startup hub here and the whole co-working facilities. There's a real view that the ACS is a supporter of the tech startup industry and someone that you can lean on and to get some help. I think that's just wonderful, and that just helps professionalism even more.
Well, let me just pick up on that. The other really important reason that professionalism is critical is in the AI space. The whole ethical considerations around AI are now topical globally. And of course, being an IT professional, you come with, particularly in ACS terms, the ACS Code of Ethics. You bring that to bear in the work you're doing in AI. Very valuable. And for startups that can come along and demonstrate there's an ethical foundation in the AI work they're doing, really valuable and increasingly recognised as important.
We'll just explore that a little bit further. We start to think about the digital economy and Australia's maturity heading that way. Consumer data rights kicked off this week. Privacy still at the forefront of everyone's thinking, and yet all the new business models are being built on data. So how do you bring these things together?
Well, again, the value of an IT professional is in being able to get the right blend between a fabulous IT solution combined with the public interest overlay that you get from being a professional. So you might say there's 2 or 3 ways of achieving this particular objective. This one is the least privacy intrusive way of doing it. And so the value the IT professional brings to bear is that you get the best combination of the technical solution and the public interest. You could have a technical expert produce a fabulous outcome, but would be oblivious to the privacy issues and things like that. And so you would end up with, you know, as you've seen sometimes with particularly public projects, they have significant privacy problems associated with them. And then you get some opprobrium attached to the provider. So you really want to avoid that. The way to avoid it is to make sure you get a professional on board at the beginning.
And Edward, what about you? So with tech startups, how much is the consumer data right going to be driving the foundational build?
Look, it's really important. What always strikes me as unbelievable is how Australians and a lot of people around the world are just prepared to give up their personal information on social media and have it published on the internet. And I try to explain to people it's a bit like a tattoo. You put a tattoo on the internet, it's there for the rest of your life. It's really hard to erase. If you leave your mobile phone number anywhere, you know, some screen scraping software is going to pick up that number and deliver it to somebody's CRM. The whole data issue and where your data is stored, I think COVID has really brought to the fore. And I try and explain to people, you know, we've moved on from where your data is stored. The next frontier for data is AI. AI is put into that data to go and figure out what the hell is going on in there, but then it correlates it with that digital footprint that you've left all over the internet voluntarily because you wanted a free social media service, and it's making determinations about you. So do you want your data to be stored in Australia with Australian AI interrogating that data, or do you want a foreign power with your data and their AI scientists picking up that data and plus what you've left on the internet and making correlations about it? And I think what that leads to is a real important demand in our country that our public servants don't outsource AI, that they develop their own AI capabilities, and that we develop it in a very ethical way and we have control of our own AI, because AI and data are almost going to be synonymous.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the one thing COVID has brought out is this realisation of supply chain dependencies and the need to be more self-sufficient locally. So, I mean, as Edward says, developing some more homegrown expertise in a lot of these areas is really important now.
So what about if we bring that down to a team level for a tech startup, maybe only 10 people, whether it's AI or other, the potential tension between agility and professionalism, and when you start to talk about the public interest, means different things to different people. Different generations have different lenses on giving up their personal information. How do you balance that in a team environment? And how do you know that the team you're going to invest in is going to crack that so that they can keep moving fast and grow that customer base and continue to build the product?
So let me challenge you on the implicit assumption in there. I think that you have to trade off professionalism for agility. You don't, because a professional doesn't need to trade that off. All they're doing is taking into account the professional requirements and still being agile. So you wouldn't want to have people think, because it's wrong anyway, that by involving professionalism you are somehow retarding your ability to progress quickly. You're not. What you're doing is building in at the incipient stage the elements that you need to protect the public interest and to manifest all the required attributes. Because if you try and add it on later, when you realise you've got it wrong, you'll be much worse off. So you're actually much better off getting it in the initial planning and baking it in from the beginning.
Any additional thoughts there, Edward?
Look, it always comes down to leadership. That's where the buck stops. The leadership sets the framework, the direction, the level of professionalism they want, whether there's going to be any shortcuts, whether they're going to be hitting any ethical issues, whether they're going to skirt those lines or not. And when we've seen plenty of software companies that have skirted that ethical line and it's cost their reputation dearly, I think there's a more modern push, I think, at the moment, that you can be professional, you can be agile, but it comes from the direction that's set.
What about those sort of cross-border issues? Because culture plays a very big part. If you look at the way Americans might build to protect privacy as opposed to what might happen here in Australia, how do you take that global mindset when tackling a new product?
Yeah, being able to tap into what the current social values are is really, really important, and it's changed so much. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, and my little sister kept one of these little diaries, and it had a little clasp on it. This was her diary, and it actually had a little padlock on it. And I got caught one day. I'd found the key and was reading her diary, and I got into big trouble. These days, kids put that exact same personal information about what they've done with photos up on Instagram or up on Facebook, and just seem to be oblivious to the fact that they're not talking one-to-one, that there's a million people reading that and will be able to find it forever, and yet it's quite intimate, and they get a shock when they realise that. I mean, I don't know if it's an education thing, because I don't really think that if they thought about it, they were prepared to give up their privacy. I think it's just they haven't thought it through, and it's so convenient. It's so easy to do it that way that they are prepared to just, do it for expediency. I mean, it's an educational issue embedded in all of these things, I think.
Edward, so those cross-border, trying to take a product global?
Look, I remember our early ACS policies on mobile phone cameras, so the policy that we had, what was right, what was wrong, and we influenced the whole policies on upskirting and where you could take a mobile phone. The law and governments have always been slow to catch up with technology, and the whole social media debate of, well, hang on, all we're doing is providing a platform. It's just being published here, right? Craigslist and some of the others. But I see really encouraging signs from government, even Australian government now, of getting on the front foot and saying, no, this is what we think you are, and these are the responsibilities that you have to have, particularly with live video feeds and those things. And there's no question governments and the law are now catching up a hell of a lot quicker than they used to.
It's interesting though, because the originator of technology tends to have sway in terms of whose value system prevails. So the US concepts of free speech, for example, are so strong that they tend to prevail in all of the platforms you see. And then they get a shock when they say, well, hang on, we've got laws of defamation and we've got things here that they don't have. And it's actually them having the trouble coming to grips with what we've got. And of course, we feel difficult sometimes about imposing our values on them for fear that they'll run away and say Australia's not important. You've got to stand up for what you believe in. And the end result of that might be, as you've seen in other jurisdictions, a completely parallel platform develops that better reflects the local values. So I think they do have to adapt. We are all now global citizens, so you have to be more sensitive to other cultures and be adaptable and be prepared to adapt.
I mean, search engines and news is just something to just keep watching, right? Because as someone who just keys into a search engine, we all expect that we want to know the latest news. We want to have the feed, we want to have what Channel 9 says, we want to see what the Australian says, but we don't think that they pay a lot of money for extraordinary journalists to write those stories. And does a search engine have a right to go straight to that story that you get it for free? So how those models end up and how the remuneration works, I don't know, but journalism has hit a very low point, and we need to bring it back and have professional journalists that are analysing, criticising, making good content, but they've got to be remunerated for it, and how those models develop is going to be fascinating. And it is cross-border because everyone's got a different view.
Keen for your views on critical ingredients for success. Lots of universities these days are doing entrepreneurship as part of their undergraduate studies, and all the student surveys are saying that more of our youngsters are keen to start their companies as soon as they finish university. Have they had the opportunity to understand where those friction points are in a supply and in a product build, or would you recommend that our computer science graduates get their experience first in a corporate or another tech startup before going and building their big plans for the future?
There was a really interesting study done about 3 years ago about what are the ingredients for success. Is it the passion of the founder? Is it the technical expertise? Is it the blend of some mature and some young people on the team? is it luck? What is it that's the number one factor? And they did a really big study of, I think, something like 10,000 startups over 5 years. And statistically, significantly, far and away, the most important factor was just luck. Being in the right place at the right time. There's a lot of other factors that you need to get there, but it really is just managing to get to the market when the market's ready for what you've got and they spot it and run with it. You can go back to early days of Wang, for people who remember Wang. Dr. Wang invented the tablet very early on, and it was a really fabulous product. It had all the functionality of today's tablets. The missing ingredient was the internet. In the late 70s, you couldn't network those devices. As standalone, they were fine. But the great enabler of the internet just wasn't there. When that came along and Apple just happened to decide they were going to do such a thing, it all came together, and it was the right timing. 10 years earlier, it would have been too early. 10 years later, you might have missed the boat. So yeah, timing and luck have a big factor. So some things you don't have control of, but yes, you do need a good mix of technical and maturity and wisdom and capital, obviously, marketing. That's the trick, to put together a team that's just right for that particular idea.
Edward, for our aspiring founders, should they be jumping straight in after they finish their studies?
Oh, look, I'm glad that universities are teaching entrepreneurship. That's wonderful. Look, first of all, an idea can come from anyone. I listened to my 10-year-old. He's determined to write into Niantic for Pokemon Go and to give them a whole variety of ideas, and they're well thought out and they're very good. And I'm equally talking to a gentleman in his 70s. He's had 25 years running a global property giant. He sees how that industry could be disrupted. But what really makes it happen is diversity. So you can have a young founder with an idea, but they don't really know the value, or they don't really know how to sell it to a large corporation. I've got a friend who's a very good sales trainer, John Dean, JD. He goes to a lot of startups and he sits down with a sales team and founders, and they all say the same thing to him, which basically is, have a look at my beautiful baby. Isn't this the most beautiful baby in the world? And the number of times a founder will say to you, I have the best product in the world. And I always go back and say, well, Microsoft didn't, and look at them, right? And they don't understand that today, particularly in a COVID environment, if you want to approach a large organisation, you can't make an appointment and say, come on, have a look at my baby. It's beautiful. This is a wonderful product, right? And I challenge them when they go out to see a large corporation, you can't talk about your product, and you can't talk about your company. And they look at me really blankly and say, well, what else is there to talk about? Well, so think about it. And I sort of say, oh, I guess I've got to talk about the client. And I said, well, yeah, but now we're in a COVID world. The client expects you to do a bit of research. And what are the discussions in the COVID world in a boardroom of an Australian corporation at the moment? Well, how do we reduce cost? How do we free up some cash? And the golden one is, how do we increase some revenue? If your technology and idea aligns to those, then you have an ability to go in there and say, I have something that will help you improve now. And I've done this research, this is what I've learned about your company, and then your rest of your discussion is about that client. But that's where the diversity has got to come in, that you bring in older people around you. And likewise to the older founders, I say, well, you're telling me you're going to run the social media strategy. I've had a look at your social media, you've got 4 followers, right? You're going to have to bring in some young people that live and breathe this to make that happen. So if you get that diversity of age groups going in a tech company, it really does help a lot.
What about in the current environment where corporates aren't necessarily taking those meetings? We're just about to hit our first recession in almost 30 years. Your tips for longevity, sustainability for tech startups in a market that's going backwards?
It has never been easier to make a sales call in history. Your client is holed up at home on Zoom, endless Zoom meetings, almost all of them internal. The novelty of a founder or a salesperson trying to sell them something that'll help them improve, they'll take that 30-minute comic relief and you will get that meeting. But what I try and explain to founders is, when you have a sales meeting, you're not selling your product, you're trying to get time, right? You're trying to get another slot of time after that and more time after that and get more people in that enterprise involved in this whole process of looking at your invention. Really, I think now is the time to make those phone calls and make it happen.
Philip, what about you? What are you looking for from your investments? How do they need to pivot in this current economy?
It really is about spotting the opportunities and providing solutions that people need. You know, if you go back 30, 40 years, the mantra was, build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. Nowadays, people will say, you're a mouse killer, or why would I want to kill mice? You know, you've got to actually have a product and explain why you need it, what it does, why it's the best way of doing it. So if I come to you and say I've got a new way of typing or something or other, you might say, oh, who needs that? We use voice recognition. You know, so it's no good bringing you a better typewriter if you don't need a better typewriter. It may be a fabulous, brilliant invention, but if no one needs it, don't bother. So you've got to work out what are the burning things that people currently need. You know, in the world of the Zooms and the Microsoft Teams, you actually might want something to stop you getting hemorrhoids because you're spending all day sitting on your backside. You know, you might want a vibrating chair or something, I don't know. So yeah, you've just got to figure out what is it that's a problem that's burning to be solved and present people with a solution that's affordable and makes sense, and they will grab it. And it doesn't matter your age or where you are or anything else.
What about your own personal investment strategies? How involved do you get with the early stage companies that you invest in?
Look, you end up extremely involved, and I put a lot of boards together for startups. So I have an endless amount of executives that come to me and say, Edward, I want to be a board director. And I explain to them that being a board director is very different. Well, your resume looks different, but you don't produce a resume and go have a chat with a founder, and at the end of the meeting the founder goes, I really love you, you're fantastic, here's 5% of my company. Right? It just doesn't work that way. And I have this expression of, you know, you kind of need to open your kimono and you need to show that you're not a one-trick pony and that you can wear this company on your elbow wherever you go, and that you can add absolute consistent value to that startup all along. And I think that's one of those key traits, and it's a wonderful thing to work with startups, but it isn't a job. And you know, so I'm basically available 24/7. Your founder will call you, they've got a problem, their first HR issue, sometimes they just need a yak. When they're raising capital, it's really intense. And the funders want to know why the board members have put their name to this company, what it is that they see that they're happy to stake their reputation and often their own money on that kind of business. You know, other times it's less work, you're in an earn-out, or you know, things are humming along and it's just going from board meeting to board meeting. But it's just part of you as you walk down the street. You are part of that startup and you're thinking about their alliances, where they might go next. It just becomes part of your framework.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at the things that will help them along. I mean, one of the things Sydney Angels does well is team-based investing, and the members of the team have these complementary skill sets. You know, someone who's good at marketing, someone good at finance, someone with some intellectual property expertise, and good connections. So they're all sort of reasonably mature, experienced business people, and they can bring to bear putting you in touch with somebody. If you need something, I know someone who can help with that. That's what makes a difference. I mean, the cash obviously is important, but the worldly experience, the connections and the cash are all really important to startups. And that's what good investors can bring to bear. And of course, that's what helps them get successful IPOs at the end of the day, or other earn-outs or sales. Trade sales.
What about your observations on the current economy? Are there any market niches that you think are ripe for disruption?
I make it a policy that I'm not an inventor and I don't see anything and I'm oblivious to it. I see there's two parts of a technology company. There's the invention, which is great, and then there's the sales and marketing side. They are completely reliant on each other. You can't have one and the other. Americans are extraordinary at the sales and marketing piece. Australians are very good on that invention piece, but very weak on that sales and marketing. But if you can get them happening together, it just gets extraordinary. And I'm not one of those people that walks down the street and sees things and solves problems. I'm the sort of person where you bring the business to me and you say, look, I've got the invention, this is the groundwork that we've covered, and I look at how we can sales and market this. What does the unique value proposition have? What should the strategy be? How should we raise money to make this happen?
What about you,
Yeah,
Phil?
there's a real appetite now as the world sort of comes out of hibernation in some places or goes back into hibernation in others. There's a real appetite for solutions to these problems. I mean, apart from coming up tomorrow with a working vaccine for COVID-19, anything is possible. And as Edward said, you keep an open mind. Don't predetermine what the world needs. You just, if you knew that now, you'd be rich by yourself. So, I want someone to come up with those and spot them and say, okay, I'll help you make that a commercial success. And that's where we add value. That's what we enjoy.
What about your observations on the available technical talent in Australia?
So as a headhunter, I've never had a problem getting talent, but I'm always encouraging my clients, if you're going to have to pay some more, you've got to make sure that there's a variable component in there. You need to make sure there's an equity plan. And at the end of the day, people might be in big IT companies, but most tech people in their DNA is they want to do a startup. They want to be there for that ride. So I've never had that problem finding technical people, but I often wonder what it's like in an average corporation. And a lot of Australian tech companies have what I call Australian tech cancer. They relive the same year 6 times rather than having 6 years of growth. Stubborn founder, or it becomes a lifestyle type of business. And I think in those cases, finding tech talent is hard. But if you've got the excitement levels up, that's what we live for.
Yeah, I mean, you get what you pay for. You can get fabulous, true value out of Aussie IT professionals. And it's not a matter of their hourly rate or their salary, it's about the contribution. Yeah, you can go offshore and get cheap labour, but if you have to rework things 17 times, at the end of the day, it's not good value. So you can either get someone who will say, look, I'll code this for you, but I can understand your functional spec and I can suggest a better way of doing it. That's one person's way of doing it. Another person will say, I'll code it exactly what you've written. I can see you've made mistakes, but I'll give you what you asked for and make no suggestion. You can take your pick which one gives you better value, and that's the difference.
Edward, I picked up one of your LinkedIn posts just recently, which was exit strategies being an overseas sale. From a public policy perspective, what can government do to ensure that we're not losing our best and brightest inventions as well as the technical talent in what's going to be an undervalued market and making it easier for acquisitions?
Look, I have a really positive attitude to Australian companies selling out to overseas. You see founders sleeping in their offices. You see them on minimum wages for extended periods, and you just see how hard they work. I've just worked with a founder, 23 years in his business. He never took anything out of there. It was time to buy the waterfront property. It was time to buy the boat. And yes, overseas buyers were coming in. So I think that's okay. But what happens is, and I'm talking to one at the moment who's got $200 million out of one of the Australian tech companies. He was there 20 years. What's he set up? He set up a fund. And he's there actively funding between $500,000 and $5 million and $5 million placements. And he's putting his expertise to absolute dozens of companies. So I see that as being really positive. Most of the founders and the people who make money put that money straight back in the industry. Where if we want more WiseTechs, if we want more Atlassians, I actually think it's just a function of getting more tech startups going. It's a mathematical equation. Once you get funders more comfortable with technology, and they've traditionally been really hard to, as I said, they've been property people, they've been mining people. But the more we fund technology, the more that we do what the ACS does, which is publish books of our most successful founders, we profile people, the bigger our tech industry gets, I think the more we're going to get Atlassian and WiseTech, so the more we'll have Australian companies that may not sell out overseas.
I agree with that, with one qualification, and this just happens to be my little pet thing. I really want to try really hard to keep the IP in Australia. I'd rather license it and get royalties than sell it offshore and then we pay the royalty to use what we invented. That really annoys me. So generally a condition of my investment is that if you want to sell the IP offshore, you've got to buy me out because I want to license it rather than sell it. But that's just my little pet thing.
Our first question from our audience, question for Philip from Philip Gregory. How much do personal contacts play a role? Are you missing the breakfast at the Innovation Building?
Oh yes, I am. We had fabulous Friday morning breakfast. It's probably a bit of an in-joke for those watching, but Sydney Angels Committee meets at 7:45 a.m. every Friday consistently, and we had a fabulous egg and bacon wrap that they make at the cafeteria there, and it was de rigueur. As a condition of joining the committee, you had to sign on to the egg and bacon wraps. But yeah, so I do miss them, absolutely, definitely.
Question for Edward. What are red flags that make you say no, and what made you so certain about that judgment?
Oh, I go and I look at the people. And often companies I look at, this is a wonderful idea, and I go and look at their people. And they've been 9 months in this company, 15 months in that company, 1 year in that company, and it's this higgledy-piggledy career. And I just sort of think, well, hang on. Startup's going to have incredible depressing moments, and these people are just going to bail. They're going to say, I'm just going to take a PAYG job. So I consistently look for people that have had long job stints. And if I go back to KitFit, one of the, I didn't believe what they were doing was possible, but when I looked at their technical staff, they had all somewhere in their career worked together somewhere before. They had pioneered some technology in another corporation, and that starts me being really, really confident that we've got a basic platform of really good people that are well qualified and are stable.
Credibility is the big thing for me. It's no good coming along and telling me in 3 years' time you're going to be bought out by Google and your total addressable market is $20 billion, because I'll say, well, just pause for a moment, just paint me the stepping stones of how you get there. And it's no good them saying, oh, trust me, we'll get there. Saying, no, you won't, not if that's your best idea of how to get there. So they've got to have a sensible, measured, as I say, credible business plan, and they've got to be able to articulate in sensible terms what's the next milestone towards that, and what are the milestones for getting there. If you can articulate that, doesn't really matter whether you do get there. It's the fact that you can describe how to get there. It's much more important than telling me what you're going to do in 3 years' time with no idea how to get there. I'm not going to put money into that. Might as well go and put it on a lotto ticket.
And it's the ability to take advice. I would meet with a founder just repeatedly, just so they get to know them. Because what I'm looking for is, are they going to listen? Are they going to pivot? Because you're going to have to pivot somewhere along the line. Or are they just going to say, no, we're just going to do it my way, and you get, again, that Australian company cancer, we're just going to relive the same year 6 times. So I think you just need to get to know the founder, and you need to get to know the team, and that starts making you more and more comfortable, because they're going to have to get a board somewhere along the line, and that's where you introduce people like Philip that can help you get those initial decks together. Have you thought out your value proposition? How are we going to take this to market? So that open-mindedness is just critical in a founder.
Question for you both. Given the current situation with COVID-19, which industries do you feel would be good areas for entrepreneurs to start a business in?
Well, tech, because we're counter-cyclical. When times are tough, we really shine. And as I said earlier, if you can align yourself to boardroom discussions at the moment that I've got a technical innovation that will help you cut your costs, or will reduce your risks, or get you more cash, and there's now plenty of marketing technology companies. We had one the other day, Pendula, that we had on Tech Insights. You know, they have the ability to go to a utility or a telco and increase their revenue, make their customers more sticky. This is a conversation people want to have right now. So I'm going to say now is a really, really good time in tough times to get out with your tech innovation.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you an example of one that I'm involved with at the moment called Ocular, OKKULAR. They've developed some very clever AI for just putting a camera on garments and being able to isolate the attributes. So, you know, V-neck, U-neck, colour, frills, length, basically 20 or 30 attributes of a garment. And for online shopping, which of course has just exploded, people want to be able to hone in on the particular attributes they want. So they can say, look, I want a blue dress, mid-length, with a V-neck, and you know, some lace on it or whatever. This gadget can just look at them and articulate all the different attributes and can distinguish between them and basically give you all the labels by which you can sort and choose. And that's been a fabulous solution that retailers are just going berserk over. They've never been able to do that before. They've normally been able to give you a handful of attributes, and it's not granular enough. So this ability to give you every observable attribute about a garment and then to be able to search by that is a huge, it's not just an incremental improvement, it's a sea change. But it's so timely with the advent of online shopping. You can't just walk around the racks in the shop and choose things. This lets you hone in on what you like. You can even put in a photo of something you've seen and it'll say, okay, here are the attributes I've identified, here are all the other things, and here's where you can buy it. So yeah, and that's just clever implementation of some tech at the right time.
Is it possible to combine launching a startup with working full-time, or do you advise committing 100%?
That's a real ethical question, that one. If you really analyse some of the great tech companies on the planet, virtually the founders always moonlighted. It's one of those very difficult ethical issues. So I always try and tell the moonlighters, can you please do it out of hours? Can you please do it on weekends? And as quickly as possible, go down to part-time and say that, you know, I've just got another interest that I'm following and try and be as ethical about that as possible. But it's an enormous step to quit what you're doing and to take whatever you saved or go into your mortgage redraw to jump in on that dream. Right? So you have to do some early verification, which might mean that you stay where you are collecting a salary while you're getting more information.
Yeah, on day one, no, but pretty soon you're going to have to. You won't get many investors coming in who'll say, we will fund your product or your invention or whatever it might be while you're working, earning a living. You've got to have your skin in the game. So yeah, for while you're just getting money out of family, friends and fools, that's fine. You might want to do it while you're still working, and so you've got an exit strategy for yourself if it doesn't work out. But once you get a little bit of traction and you want some external investors, they're going to want you in there full time making this work if you really want their money.
What Philip has said is just spot on, skin in the game. The number of founders that come, look, I want to raise $2 million, this is what I want to do. And I say, great, you know. How much of your own money have you put into this so far? Oh, none. They just have no credibility. And that's another one of the criteria used to assess a company. If they don't believe in this 100%, if they haven't put in every cent they've got into this and believe in it, no investor's going to believe in it.
Given the heavy dependence on AI, on data, for better training, how easy or difficult would Australian data privacy laws make it for entrepreneurs to start and then expand their businesses in the AI space?
I'm not sure I accept the dichotomy. Being able to utilise data effectively doesn't mean compromising privacy. Data can tell you the story in an anonymised form just as easily with personal information. It doesn't need to be personalised to give you the information you need to solve problems. So I think I would reject the dichotomy at the beginning. You don't trade one off against the other. You don't have to.
So what about the concept of any regulatory changes affecting a business model? Do you see that as a risk or not in data-based businesses?
No, it comes back to what I said earlier, Andrew. If you bake in from the beginning an appreciation of what being privacy aware requires, you'll have a fabulous product without being subjected to privacy regulatory constraints. You can see them coming a mile off. They're not going to regulate you for no reason. There's only going to be regulation where people have been hurt, and that generally means they've been hurt because their personal information has been used in a way they never envisaged and never consented to. So if an IT professional can tell you that before you start, so build it so that you don't end up with that problem and you won't have a problem. You have nothing to fear from the regulatory regime at all.
If a graduate has an idea on a product description and implementation but has no industry contacts, what's the best strategy to get an investment offer?
It's a tough one. Look, you have to go initially to the 3 Fs that Philip mentioned, right? The family, fools and friends, to get some of that initial funding to happen. But I have a belief that it is really, really difficult to get an idea funded in Australia. Right? Whether that's right or wrong, it's just the way it is. Investors want to see that you put your heart and soul in it, that you've put some hard currency to it, that you've gone out and you've spoken, if it's a B2B product, that you've gone out and spoken to some CIOs and you've at least got their opinion on it, or maybe they'd even committed to run a pilot. But I just don't think you can get funding off an idea. It's pretty difficult to do.
Yeah, you won't get external funding if all you've got is an idea. I mean, if you haven't been able to persuade at least your parents or your friends or your family to go with your idea, then you're not going to get me to put money in.
If we don't talk about our company's baby skills, expertise, technical skills, and how it can be more useful during the current environment in meetings, then what are we going to talk about?
You're going to talk about the client. Right? The moment you start talking about your company and your product, you are going to get delegated down to who you sound like. If you are lucky enough to jag an appointment with a senior executive in a business, in a bank, and you start babbling on about speeds and feeds, they're going to be so polite. They'll push the secret button. PA will get you out within 20 minutes. They'll show you their boardroom and all their functions, and they'll say, look, I need you to talk to Fred in our technical department. And you're like, really exciting, I nailed this appointment. But what they're basically saying is, I don't understand anything that you're talking about. You're not talking my language. My language is business. You're talking speeds and feeds. Go talk to the techos and see whether they like it. But the techos don't have any money, right? The money comes from the business. So and there are some wonderful sales trainers out there, and come to me via LinkedIn and I can point you to some. But the conversation has to be about the client. It's got to be, how do you do this currently? Do you have any problems with the way that you do it? If you did it this way, what would happen to your organisation? It's now so easy to find out what companies do. It's all on the internet, what their strategic objectives are for the year, what they want to invest in, where they're looking to cut costs. You really have to become a researcher, and you've got to be able to go into an appointment, understanding the client, having an idea what the problem might be, and questioning them, and finding out from that executive what their pain points are, and are those pain points important? Yeah, I've got pain, but what's it costing you? Oh, it only costs us a few grand a month. But if it costs us $10 million a year, well, all of a sudden you've got justification to charge for your software between $2 and $4 million because you've quantified what the value of that problem is. But speeds and feeds will always get you delegated downwards.
Boards of directors don't sit around contemplating a pile of hardware and software. They look at a business case. So there's got to be a business case that the board signs off on. The real challenge often, in fact, is the reverse, and that is mapping the business case to the deliverables of the contract that the organisation signs. I mean, I spent a lot of my time consulting on that very thing, mapping the business case to the deliverables, because if you don't get the business case delivered, the board will quickly lose faith in the project. You know, there's a significant bank that's currently being prosecuted for not complying with certain rules. Do you think they're in the market for a clever solution that you can sell them on that will prevent the non-compliance? They don't care how you do it. If you can do it, you've got it made. So it's a solution that people need.
So software salespeople are amongst the highest paid people on the planet. You know, these days, an enterprise software salesperson, their on-target earnings are between $350,000 and $400,000 per annum. Half of that is base salary, half of that is risk. Why do you pay them that kind of money? Well, I can assure you that in any company they represent, including some of the bigger tech companies, when they approach a bank, the bank's probably never heard of them because they're selling to the business, they've never heard of your company. They absolutely do not want what you're selling. They have no interest in it. Your job is to find the 8 to 12 people in that organisation that absolutely will bang the table and say, you solve a problem for us. And that's where Philip's business case comes in, and then that business case gets taken to the board. If you are a young startup, you might be lucky enough to network at the ACS or at Sydney Angels. Someone can tip you into a senior executive that'll have a pilot, and then basically they're going to do a use case for you. This is exactly what we did. These are the benefits that we got. It's quantified. This is why we're going to go ahead with that, and you can take that to other clients. But if you talk about your product and how wonderful your company is, you're not going to get anywhere.
So this next question, I think you've both already answered, so I'll just put a different angle on it. The question was, what do the speakers think about the value of sweat equity, which you've answered. What about a scenario where a founder's put so much sweat equity in that continue to overprice their investments? Have you had an experience in mentoring someone to bring it back to where a market rate can be found? And how do you navigate those pitfalls?
It is difficult to pace yourself, and particularly to raise your valuation at the right levels at the right time. So it's no good coming to me, you know, when you've hardly got any market traction and saying I'm worth $10 million and offer me 5% equity, because we've got nowhere to go to get more capital investment in, because your valuation is going to go up and become unaffordable for the equity you've got. So you've got to be able to match where you're at the beginning. So typically as a early stage angel investment, you're looking at sort of at least 25 and 40% equity for around $1 or $2 million. That'd be sort of a rule of thumb. And the reason you want that is because when you move to the next stage and you've reached the next milestone and you can objectively show your valuation's gone up, you've still got something worthwhile to sell to a venture capitalist in your Series A or whatever. It's no good going to them and saying I want $20 million for 5%, because they won't give it to you. So yeah, that's the trick, to pace it. Your sweat equity, you can put whatever value on you like, but you still have to be able to fit within these basics of staging your valuation to match the capital raises that you need to do to get where you want to go.
Look, I try and get discussion off valuation as quickly as I possibly can. And yeah, look, at the end of the day, if the company's going to be worth $100 to $400 million, arguing, you know, a few million here on the valuation, you know, probably is irrelevant. What I try and say to founders is the magic thing is use of funds. I want you to imagine if you got $10 million, how would you use those funds? And then if you got 5 million, what would you do? If you only got 1 million, what would you do? And there's nothing wrong if you don't know what you do with 10 million. But I've got founders that can just clearly articulate and do a spreadsheet to say, this is how that $10 million would be used. This much would be in product, this much would be global expansion, these are the grants that we'd get back, this is the sales and marketing we do. If you can nail this use of funds, but it's also backed up with, we've done some pilots or we've got some early clients and this is the feedback that we're getting, you're really starting to cook with gas. But if all you have is an idea and you want to raise money to cut code, it's a really hard yakka.
Next question for you both. Do you think one should start a startup if there is already software for your idea, but you just want to make it more efficient?
Good question.
Here's a good question.
I mean, if you could make a material difference and do it much better, and it comes back to what we've both been hammering on about. You're presenting a solution. If you have a better solution and someone needs a solution, then you should theoretically do better than the one who hasn't got the best solution. But a lot of it is about the marketing. You can go back again, keep using examples from the past where you can have objectively superior technical solution, a bit like Betamax and VHS in the old videotape game, where Sony had the better technology. All the TV studios were using Sony technology, but the public, the retail level, Philips had done a much better marketing job, and VHS just ended up taking off. It was objectively not the better solution, but it was much more commercially successful because it was better marketed. So it's no good just having the better solution. You've got to be able to explain to people in words they can understand why yours is better and have them buy off on that concept and go with you. Otherwise, forget it.
There's nothing worse than going into a high-powered investor meeting and the founder says, we're the only one who's got this in the world. And just the whole mood of the room just drops. And for two reasons. If it truly is the only one in the world, well, the investors are losing interest thinking, well, you know, it's pretty hard to sell. It's you out in the wilderness. And they have a team of researchers that are sitting in the back office there. They're just going to go to them later on and say, righto, go figure out who their competition is. So I always try to get founders to do a competition matrix, right? So have the name of the companies across the top, have all your features down the side and evaluate yourself against them. And you will always find that an investor is far more comfortable knowing that you're not the only one with this tech and there's two of you or maybe three of you that are out there developing the market. Because for them, it's proof that there is a market.
Our final question, gents, thanks so much for tonight. Your observations on the international landscape and what do you think Australian entrepreneurs should learn from startup nations such as Israel or Silicon Valley?
Just go for it. Just go for it. Don't worry about whether you'll get investment. Just focus on the problems you're trying to solve and being able to explain to those who you think are your potential market how you're solving their problem, and the rest will just come together.
Look, Israel has an incredible technical focus and they're very specialised. They're very good at security and they've got their right ecosystems. Never get intimidated by America. We hear about all these great capital raises and the massive amounts of money that's thrown around, but it's all relative. You know, there's tens of thousands of startups throwing their decks around in Silicon Valley and only a handful are getting funded. So the ratio probably here isn't any different. I think Australia is an extraordinary place to pilot your technology, particularly if you're in the B2B market. We have the largest, most complex banks in the world with tough procurement processes. We've got Coles and Woolworths. We've got huge telcos and utilities. You only have to win half a dozen of those. And all our corporates are on the world stage. And if those corporates can put their hand on their heart and say your technology is good, you have done your job in Australia. Right? You will then get that Silicon Valley funding and you will expand in the US, and then Australia just becomes how do we just grow that and service that. So never be intimidated, get your ideas together, get the right advice, get the right board, not hanger-oners, people who are professional. Why are they on the board? You'd have Philip on the board for law and IP, it would be absolutely critical. But I often find that I have to clean up boards. That, you know, you've got a big banking executive on a board and they're paying them and they're the wrong profile. It's an entrepreneurial business and you've got someone in a monthly meeting talking about governance and governance this, and the conversation needs to be about revenue strategy and how do we get out of this company?
Yeah, the other thing that's worthwhile pointing out to people, there's this great myth that capital is much easier to get in USA, for example. But the joke we tell is that you walk down the streets of Palo Alto, the muggers will jump out of the shadows at you, demand that you take $10 million and want to see a 500% return in 3 weeks, or they'll kill you and take your invention. So you've got to be very careful what you wish for. Australian investors are conservative only in the sense that they'll dole it out to you as you need it and as you reach milestones. They won't throw a pile of cash, but they're much more patient and it's much smarter investors, and they'll contribute more in non-dollar value than you'll get out of some of the investors even in Silicon Valley. So you just need to be a bit careful about what you think you'll get when you go offshore.
Gentlemen, Philip Argy, Edward Mandla, on behalf of ACS members who've dialed in tonight, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion. It really allows us to think about what the future looks like and why people should be investing in their technological skills now. That's all we have time for tonight, folks. Thank you so much for joining, and don't forget to dial in next Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Good night.